Welcome to Ground Control. The item that I have for review today is the WFLY ET16 16 channel transmitter. It supports FHSS Protocol, frequency hopping spread spectrum. Say that fast 3 times. Okay, all the switches on here are 3 position switches except for the momentary switch, and you have a 2 position switch back here. I normally use this for resetting my timer, and I normally use this one as a throttle cut switch or a throttle safety switch. It has 2 sliders, thumb sliders on the left and the right. There's a lot of friction on these sliders, and there's a very good center detent on both of them. So you know exactly where the center position is. It can take up to a 3S LiPo. I've got the battery bay open. It has a USB port in here for updating the firmware. You cannot charge the battery inside the transmitter, which is fine with me. I never charge my LiPos in the aircraft or in the transmitter. I always pull them out and put them on my balance charger. I think that's the safest thing to do. It comes with a lithium-ion battery bay. It takes 3 of the 650 lithium-ion, or you can power it off of a 2S, 3S LiPo. I have an old 3S LiPo that I'm going to be putting in it. It looks like a servo port connector to me. It's got 3 pins. The pins are marked so you know which one is your ground and which one is your hot wire. One of those little red JST connectors fit right over those 2 pins perfectly, so that's what I did. I just used an adapter, a JST adapter, and I used that to power it. The battery bay is fairly large, so I like that in case I want to use a larger battery. It uses a standard JR bay. It does support a 4IN1 module, crossfire, etc. Any one of these external RF modules that use the JR format. They are currently testing their own 4IN1 module, but they did not have it ready for production yet, so I did not receive that. I do have a jumper 4IN1 module that will work for this, so as soon as that arrives, I'll be programming some of my little ready-to-fly microplanes, and we'll take this transmitter out and test it flying those planes as well. It has potentiometer dials on the top. It has 1 LED on the left-hand side for the power on the transmitter. The other one gives you the status of the RF module. It does come with a diversity 9-channel receiver that supports their FHSS protocol. It supports PWM, PPM, and S-Bus. It has a USB data port on the side for updating the firmware on the receiver. It has the USB port, and then it has a data port for additional equipment. It has it comes with a external voltage lead that you can plug in here if you want to monitor external voltage like your flight battery or some other piece of equipment. And let me see, the lead is over here, so it comes with that lead. It comes with an additional rocker and spring assembly for the Hall effect gimbals, and I love the Hall effect gimbals. But I assume this is for changing modes, because it does have a menu where you can actually change the modes on it. Now this one came to me as a mode 2 transmitter, but they do put those pieces in there for you. It also comes with a lanyard, and let me see, I think that's it. It comes with this little paper guide. It has a lot more information on it than it appears. So it has most of everything that you'll see on the transmitter. Doesn't tell you how everything functions, but it does tell you what everything is. In the show notes, I have a link to this transmitter, a link to the jumper 4IN1 module, a link to the PDF manual for this transmitter, because it has tons and tons and tons of features. I'm only going to have time to go over a small fraction of those features. So if you're interested in this, and there's a link to the PDF manual. It's like a 132-page manual that covers everything. So if you want to know all the details about the transmitter, go ahead and download the PDF manual and take a look at it. But it's navigation. It has a color touchscreen, and I love the touchscreen. And when we set up our plane today, we're going to be using the touchscreen. Everybody knows how to use the navigation buttons. It comes with a direction button that you can depress to make your selections. The button over here is for exiting your menus. A quick click will exit the menu. If you hold it down for a couple of seconds, it will lock the screen so that you can't accidentally change any data. So unless you're actively changing something in the transmitter, adjusting something in the transmitter, you might want to keep it locked. Holding the button down again will unlock the transmitter. This button over here on the left hand side is your home and monitor button, or your channel button. So a quick click of that button will take you to the home screen again, and holding it down, it will bring up your channel monitor, which it really has a couple of really cool features in the channel monitor, so I want to show you that too. All of your trim buttons. The sticks are referred to as J1 through J4. The channel order for this protocol that they use, the FHSS protocol they use, is aileron, elevator, throttle, rudder. And you'll see that in the channel display. So what else do we have here? I pulled the cover, well, I had the cover pulled off of that, but these two little rubber covers down here, if you can see them, that's where you adjust the tension on your sticks. If you want to decrease or increase the tension on your sticks, that is where you would do it. So let me go ahead and get my battery in it. We will power it up, and we'll go over the menu screen, the navigation screen, show you that the touch screen is working, where you can find most of the features, the menus that you're going to be working in most of the time. And then once we go through the menu system, then we'll go ahead, and I've got a rig set up over here for this receiver. So we're going to bind up to this receiver. I've got 3 servos to connect to it, an ESC and a motor. So we'll test everything out, and then I'll be putting this in my Aerobat 3D plane since I haven't flown it in quite a while. And we're going to take it out as soon as the weather breaks. We've got 5 inches of snow on the ground right now. So as soon as the weather breaks, in part 2, I will be taking the transmitter and the receiver out with the Aerobat 3D plane, and we'll test it out in the field with that. So I'll pause the camera here, bring it in, and power it up. Oh, and you have 2 power buttons here. So you can power it on with either button. You can power it off with either button. If you depress a single button to power it off, it'll bring up a menu to ask you if you want to power off the transmitter. If you depress both buttons at the same time, you can bypass that, and the radio will shut down quicker. So okay, so I think that's everything that you need to know right up front. So we'll bring it in, take a look at it. Okay, I hope I've got this set up so there's not too much glare on the screen. But okay, so the first thing we want to do, let's go in, and this is where you'll set up your name on the transmitter, your username. I think it's 8 to 10 characters, so I've just got mine set up as GCRC. Just click that to go back. Okay, so the WFLY logo here, this is the main menu screen. You know, this is where you're going to be doing 90% of your work. So if we go into the system settings, and I wanted to go to the second page, here's your pager right here in the upper right hand corner, and look at the information. And so here it gives you the model number, the firmware version, the ID, and you have the ability to upgrade here via the USB port. Let's go ahead and back out of that. Your language setting, screen calibration. If you ever need to calibrate your touch screen, it'll put a little circle up in each one of the corners, and you'll click that to do your calibration, and we can just exit out of that. data reset. So if you want to reset the model menu, reset all models. If you want to go back to a factory reset if something really gets dorked up in the menu system, you know, you've done something, you don't know how to get it back, you can always do a factory reset there. The transmitter also supports training port, a training port. So if you have two of these, you can set up one as your master pilot and one as your training pilot. You can also do wireless relay with it. You can also do wireless copy and transfer of model files. So so that's the system menu. And as you go into the link settings, and here's where you can do relay flight. You can set up servo frequency if you have servos that operate on something other than a standard frequency. It's set up for 50 Hertz. Bus servo settings, range check. If you want to do a range check on, if you've got a telemetry unit set up for metric or Celsius or British or, you know, imperial or Fahrenheit. That's where you would set that up. Failsafe, we're definitely going to be using this. And this is where you would set up your failsafe through all 16 channels. Receiver output, each individual channel on the receiver. So if you wanted to change that, if you wanted to change the port assignment, I'm not going to do that. Sensors, so alarm for different sensors, and you've got 3 pages here to set up your sensors. Telemetry, receiver, if you had a telemetry receiver or external module. Let's see what else we got. A link. So this is where you're the internal module is turned on. So if you're using a plug-in module, you want to turn off the internal RF, and then I've got telemetry on. It basically, the only thing that gives me right now is the voltage that's coming from the BEC, from the ESC, how much voltage is going into the receiver. Your channel modes, default is mode A. That's where I'm leaving it. I think that it depends on the channel order as to what mode you're in. The multi-protocol module is not installed, so it's off. And then here's where you would start the bind on the receiver, and we'll be doing that here in a few minutes. Okay, so let's get back out of that. The general settings for the monitor, the channel monitor, so you can get to the channel monitor that way, or like I said, if you hold down this button, that'll bring up the channel monitor too. And if you watch the display on the channel monitor, you'll see it's aileron, elevator, throttle, and rudder. And then the gear switch is set up for SG on the top right hand. Right there, that 3-position switch is where the gear switch is set up. So we can go ahead and exit out of that. This is where you set up, you'll select your model file that you want to load, your model type, what type of model you're going to program, whether it's a multi-rotor, helicopter, airplane, glider. And then depending on the type of plane you select, then you'll have all different kinds of configurations to choose from on aileron, whether it is a single or Y cable, a single servo that's going to be running your ailerons, or dual ailerons with a Y cable, or whether you're going to have 2 independent servos and channels for your ailerons. And if you do this, it will set up channel 6 as your secondary aileron channel. So just be aware of that. 2 ailerons plus flaps, flying wing, 2 aileron plus 1 flap. Oops, let's go back. 2 ailerons, 2 separate aileron channels, 2 ailerons plus 2 flaps, and then 2 ailerons plus 2 flaps. So you have all kinds of configurations to choose from there. If you want to set up special functions, right now you can see that your control sticks are assigned to aileron, elevator, throttle, rudder, and then your switches are assigned to everything else, your switches, your pots, your sliders. If you need to reverse a servo, this is the screen in which you will do it. It goes through all 16 channels. I noticed that when I when I was testing the motor with this, the throttle is set for reverse by default. Now, this is the first transmitter where I've seen the throttle reverse by default. So be very careful in changing that, because I did, and it powered up my motor until I switched it back to reverse. So make sure that you don't have a prop attached to your motor. Of course, you would do that with any transmitter that you're programming, right? Okay, and make sure that you don't have any problems with the throttle channel being in reverse. And if you do, then set it back to normal. I have seen ESCs and motors before, or planes, depending on the gyros and the receivers, needed to have the throttle channel reversed, but I don't think I've ever had to do that before. Setting up your dual rates. So if you go to page 2, this is where you'll be able to select your channel and set up your dual rate for each channel. If you wanted to set up a switch for different modes for different dual rates, you would also be able to do that. Let's go back to page 1. And so you'll set your rate for A and B, your up and down. So if you want differential dual rates or differential expo, and then here's also where you would have your offset if you needed an offset on your servo or your dual rate. If you need to modify your endpoints, right now by default the endpoint maximum travel is all 135%. All dual rates are currently set at 100%. And you can see, you know, which channels are which: elevator, aileron, throttle, rudder, gear. Timer, we will definitely be setting up a flight timer, and we'll set up a safety switch for our throttle, and then we'll set up our momentary switch to reset our flight timer. And also have, and this is where you'll set your reset, your start, and your stop switches for that, and whether you want it to count up or you want it to count down, your alarm. So we'll be setting that up. Trim settings, these are just steps on your trim settings. Sub trim, you're definitely going to be using that. So one of the last things I do before I install the servos in the aircraft is setting up my sub trim so that my servo arms are completely centered on the servos. Last thing that I do. Okay, and then we're back to the model menu again. And here, if you click this, click your model, and then you can select it, you can copy it, you can send it for wireless transfer, you can receive it via wireless transfer, and you can rename it. And so we're going to go ahead and rename ours, and we're going to name it Aerobat 3D. Aerobat 3D. Okay, so there we got our Aerobat 3D named now, and it shows up on the home screen. On the home 2 screen, this little icon down here, it'll show you your external voltage, your receiver voltage. 12.2 volt is the battery voltage of the transmitter, and then you have timer 1 and you have timer 2 listed on your home 2 screen. Go back to home 1, and you can also start and stop your timers from the touch screen. So one click will start it, one click will stop it, and then if you hold it down, it'll reset it. Same thing for the timer 2. Pretty cool. I love touch screens on transmitters. I think it makes everything so much faster and so much easier than having to use the buttons and the dial navigation. So, alright, so what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and set up our plane. I get you probably won't be able to see the rig. I'll go ahead and I'll zoom out so that you can see the bind up to the receiver and that everything is working okay. And then we'll go in and set up our dual rates and sub trim, set up our timer, set up our safety switch for our throttle, and then we'll be good to go. Okay, so let's go into our model menu. We've got the correct model loaded. To model menu, let me see, general menu, model type. We want airplane. And we're going to use a single servo for the ailerons. We're going to select that. And then we're going to have a normal tail, single servo for the elevators, and a single servo for the rudder. Okay, so now our channels will be set up properly. Okay, now let's go into our timer setup. Okay, so I want my timer set for 5 minutes. I want it to be 5 minutes. Okay, and remainder completed. And I want my reset switch to be my momentary switch, and that is going to be SH. And the position for the reset is going to be on when I pull it forward, off in its normal position. So I think that's what we want. Back to timer. My start switch is going to be my throttle, which is going to be J3, and the position. And I want to set the position of my throttle to where I want my throttle to be when it starts the timer. Okay, and it's going to be linear. And so I'm going to set it here, and I'm going to move it up about 15 to 20%. Usually you're hitting somewhere between 15%, 10 to 15% before your motor actually starts spinning. So I'm going to put it right there, and I'm going to say set. Okay, and so it's going to have to be above that green line before it actuates the timer, which is what we want. Okay, so back out of that, and my stop switch, my throttle safety switch, which is going to be SF, and the position I want is on when it's back. That's when my throttle safety switch is going to be engaged, and so I want to make sure that the timer stops when I've got my throttle disabled. So I think that's correct. We'll find out. Okay, so let's go back and let's see what happens. Okay, so my SH momentary switch reset the timer, and I don't have a safety switch set up on the throttle yet. So when I gauge the throttle, it should start counting down. There it goes. And if I bring my SF switch forward to stop it, there we go. And then I can reset it again. Okay, so our timer is working the way we want it to, and it's doing the countdown. Okay, and so I want it to inhibit retaining the timer in memory. If I power off the transmitter, power it back on, but I do want it to give me a vibration, and I don't want a constant vibration. So vibrate 2, I'm going to go with that. Okay, so our timer is set up. Now what we need to do is set up a throttle safety switch. Model menu, throttle cut. Okay, so we want throttle cut. Alright, so status, we want the throttle cut on, and the switch that we want to enable it is going to be our SF switch again.
Throttle cut off.
And the position when it's on is going to be
throttle cut on.
That position when it's in its default position. Okay, so we've got our throttle cut set up. Now let's go into our monitoring channel, and right now our throttle cut is on, so I'm not getting anything on the monitor when I'm moving the throttle.
Throttle cut off.
Okay, so now my throttle cut is off, and now I'm getting throttle. So that's precisely,
Throttle cut on.
and now it's on. So that's my throttle safety switch. Okay. And it activated my timer.
Throttle cut
Okay,
on.
so resetting my safety switch will stop the timer, and then I can reset it. And then, as long as my throttle safety switch is engaged, it won't start my timer until I go all the way back down again.
Throttle cut on.
Okay, I think that's going to work out well. Okay, so now let's go ahead and zoom out of here. And now that we have our channels set up, we have our timer set up, we have our throttle safety switch set up, let's go ahead and bind up to our receiver. I'll go ahead and connect the motor, and then we'll make sure everything is working properly. Oh, let's do one more thing. Let's go into Failsafe. Link settings maybe? Yeah, Failsafe. Failsafe in the link settings. Okay, so aileron, elevator, throttle is set for minus 152%. That should be safe enough. Rudder, gear, aux, everything else I want set to 0, which should be a neutral position. Okay, so our failsafe, the default setup on our failsafe should work just fine. And we will test that out as well. Okay, so let's go back into our link settings. And link, and this is where we'll start the linking process. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and power up my receiver, my ESC, my servos, my motor.
Receiver battery 4.8 volts.
Okay, and I'm going to have to go back in later and disable all those telemetry notifications. Alright, so I want to put my receiver in bind by holding down the set button. Okay, so we're in bind mode. Now let me start here on the transmitter.
Receiver battery 4.8.
Okay, so now it says link done. I've got a receiver, transmitter ID, receiver ID. Okay, so we're bound up. Let's go ahead and exit the menu. And we should see, let me see, this should be my elevator, my aileron. Let me see, aileron, servo. Yeah, this should be my aileron servo. This should be my elevator servo. This should be my rudder servo. So let's see here.
Receiver battery 4.8.
Okay, so there's my elevator. Can you guys, I hope you guys can see that on camera. So my elevator is working fine. And up here, the servo is my aileron. And then rudder. Okay, now to test our safety switch. Alright, our safety switch is engaged right now. I'm going to make sure that the motor is not spinning. Okay, our motor is dead, which it should be.
Throttle receiver battery 4.8 volts.
Okay.
Throttle cut on. Throttle cut off.
Okay, so my throttle cut is off. Alright. And now I have motor.
Throttle cut on.
Okay, now my throttle cut is on, my safety switch is engaged, and my motor is not spinning. Okay, so everything is working, except now we need to set our sub-trim on all of our servos to get them centered up. Okay, so now let's go into sub-trim. Okay, and so this is my aileron servo. Yeah, my aileron servo. And it looks like it is pretty well centered already. I'm not going to have to do anything to that. My elevator servo, however, is a little bit off. So I'm going to go into elevator, and then it's going to give you these arrows at the top. Let's see which way we need to go with it. And that is that the proper direction? Let me see here. Yeah. Okay, so I had to put in minus 96 ticks on my elevator servo to get it completely centered up. And let's look at my rudder. My rudder servo is a bit off too. So let's go to the rudder now. and see which direction wrong direction.
Receiver battery 4.8 volts.
Okay, now it's completely centered up. So all three of my servos are all centered up. I had to use sub-trim to center up 2 of the 3 servos. The motor's working, the receiver's working, transmitter's working fine. So we have everything set up that we need to. And there's the channel monitor. I wanted to show you something cool with the channel monitor. Let me bring it in, bring the camera in a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. Make sure I got all the servos in the screen. I'm going to go ahead and unplug the motor. And I would suggest you do that before you use this this monitor, but this test. But what this will do is it will actuate every one of the servos. You'll notice that the throttle is off. If you have a prop attached to your motor, you want to make sure that you leave that off, because it's going to cycle, the monitor is going to cycle everything. So to make sure that everything is working as it should. Okay, so now if you want to check the neutral position of all of your servos in the channel monitor, you can set it from off to neutral. So it's putting everything in the center position. Now we're going to move everything. Now if you watch, hopefully you can see it on camera because it does it very slowly. But if you watch the servo arms on each one of the servos, they're currently being actuated through the entire range.
Receiver battery 4.8 volts.
And right now everything is set at 100% dual rate with no expo. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that. I thought that was a really cool feature. Okay, so now we're off again. Alright, and we'll go ahead and exit back to the main menu. Okay, so this is going to be a little tough for me to do, but we're going to see if we can get it done. And what I want to demonstrate now is if we have the failsafe working the way we want it to. So let me remove my throttle cut switch. Let's get the motor spinning. Motor is spinning. We've got full deflection on the aileron and elevator servos. So if you watch, when I disconnect or when I power off the transmitter, the motor should stop and those 2 servos should go back to neutral position. Okay, there we go. Our failsafe is working the way I want it to. I want the motor to shut down. I want all the servos to go back to a completely neutral position. So let me go ahead and start up the transmitter again. And we're linked back up. Alright. Alright. So I think everything is working precisely the way we want it to. We are ready to install the receiver into the Aerobat 3D plane. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for part 2 where we'll take it out and fly the 3D plane. And I will see you in the air.